Welcome to the TMRN Time Monk Radio Network. I'm Jules, and today is Friday, the 17th of June, 2011. May the road we choose be the right road today. And tonight we have financial analyst and dedicated author Bix Weir. Bix is the creator of the Road to Ruta theory and has worked closely with the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, or GATA. Bix's website is roadtoruta.com. Hi Bix, welcome to the WebBot Forum Roundtable.
Thanks, Jules. It's good to be here.
Well, it's good to have you here. The WebBot Forum administrator is Fox, and today he'll be doing the recording and technical support of the show. Several members of the forum were kind enough to join us tonight. They include moderators Perseus and Dr. Steve, and members Romans, RTG, Odison, and Diane B. For listeners, this interview will assume you have a fairly good understanding of finance, and in particular Bix's work. Though we will ask him to expand on his Road to Ruta theory, you may find many of his interviews on the SGT show, which can be found on YouTube, and many of his many articles at roadtoruta.com. This interview will be available on YouTube for free on the WebBot Forum channel and at the website webbotforum.com. Bix, ready for the interview, sir?
I sure am.
For our first question tonight, we turn to Romans.
Hi, Bix. Welcome to the forum, and we look forward to this interview tremendously, and it's really an honor to speak with you. First of all, the Road to Ruta theory postulates that there's a group of people in the United States as well as around the world that are working to remove and destroy the financial banking powers that have secretly controlled all the aspects of our lives for hundreds of years and involved rigging markets with computer programs. Bix, can you tell the listeners a little more specific info on your theory?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me on, and thanks for the question. The Road to Ruta theory has grown out of 10 years of researching the manipulation of gold and silver that's been going on for all these years. Now it's very visible and very obvious, but back in 2000 it wasn't as obvious to a lot of people. And the way I came about discovering this theory that there are people working behind the scenes to remove the banking powers that have controlled us for so long is through a Federal Reserve Boston publication called The Road to Ruta and another publication called Wishes and Rainbows. And these were children's comic books, educational comic books that were written to teach children about the laws of scarcity, as well as have some background behind the reasoning to have a gold-backed system versus an unbacked fiat monetary system. And when I came across these comic books, it was very odd. They were very cryptic, very unusual. There were passages in these comics that would make no sense unless you really understood what was going on behind the scenes with the monetary system. And it all comes back to a economic theory back in the 1960s called On the Road to the Golden Age. And it's a Nobel Prize winning theory. And the theory was that in order to go from an unbacked monetary system to a gold-backed system, the best way to go about that would be to run the unbacked fiat system as long as you could, sucking up all the benefits of unbacked money, such as building houses, building infrastructure, building your army, spending all this money to suck out all the benefits, and then at the end, basically walk away. And since the 1960s and early 70s, that's basically what the United States has been doing. They talk about debt ceilings, they'll talk about, tightening their belt. But if you look at what has happened since we went off the gold standard in 1971, the U.S. has been printing money faster and faster year by year. And the ultimate goal is to completely destroy the U.S. dollar, walk away from the debt, and then you have the physical assets that you've built in your country and you built your military. And that's kind of the idea behind what they were trying to do. Now, to do that, it took a lot of behind the scenes market rigging and the introduction of computers into markets back in the early 70s. And that's where Alan Greenspan came in, being that he was one of the first computer experts in the 1960s. He actually blamed himself for the Y2K problem when there weren't enough. They only did 2 digits for the year instead of 4. So he was a computer expert and a gold bug back then, and has been working behind the scenes to implement this return to the gold standard. But at the same time, when you destroy the monetary system, that's the seat of power of the banks. So you're also taking out these bankers that have been controlling us for so long. So that's kind of the overall theme of the road to Ruta. And there's a lot of different offshoots, but that's the basics of it.
Well, I appreciate that. I sure hope you're right. It sure gives us some hope. I have one more question here while we're at it. We're all aware that you're familiar with Cliff High's WebBot reports. Can you spend some time and explain to us how you feel some of his predictions fall in line with your road to Ruta theory?
Sure. Yes, I am a big fan. I claim it proudly. Cliff is an amazing human being, and his WebBot programs and the way he deals with that is amazing. I actually did not come across Cliff until much later. I've been working in the gold and silver manipulation angle since about the year 2000, working with Bill Murphy and Gatta and those guys to find out what was really going on. And then the more the road to Ruta theory developed, the more I saw the coming chaos of the end of a fiat money system. And in about 2008, I came across Cliff's work. One of my subscribers pointed me towards Cliff, and I've been hooked since 2008. And a lot of what Cliff says about the economy, about the crashing of the dollar, fit in almost perfectly with my analysis of the road to Ruta, the destruction of the monetary system on purpose, the removal of the bad guys, shall we call them, the banking cabal or the military-industrial complex, whatever you want to call them. But as far as Cliff's work, it gets closer and closer to exactly what I've been predicting for the last 4 or 5 years, that there will be a total destruction of the fiat monetary system. It will be chaotic. But just recently, Cliff has talked about a little bright light in the far off future. Now, my theory is a stronger bright light, in that we will remove all debt from the world in the electronic form, in the paper form, all debt. It'll be a debt jubilee, basically, with the crashing of the banks and the implosion of the derivative market, which will be a good thing. Most people are in debt right now, be it a home or a credit card or a state, local government, countries. The crashing of the banking system will erase all debt. Now, when you erase all debt, you're also erasing all the electronic and paper assets as well. And electronic assets they haven't been around that long. Basically, since the 80s, we've believed that electronic blips count as money. But truthfully, they're just electronic blips. They're IOUs, to and from a bank. And people, I think, will have a very rude awakening when they wake up and see that, the things they believed in to be their assets were nothing but, electronic entries at a bank that is pretty much insolvent at the moment. So back to Cliff, everything's coming in line. Cliff has gotten more and more dire as of late on the US dollar. He also recently, I don't know how recently, but really got into on the silver side, pointing out how silver should perform a lot better than almost anything else. And it might be even the silver bullet that kills the banks, the rise in the price of silver. That jives with my theory as well, although I think the difference lies in that I believe they, as in the banks and the controllers of gold and silver, can place the price of silver anywhere they want. Meaning that if you have a computer program trading back and forth to itself, you can flash crash a market, for example, like they did recently. You saw the price of Accenture, the stock go from $40 to zero. And that was a real trade. They had flushed out all the buyers and with a computer. And if they had stopped trading of that market right then, they could have easily settled all contracts at zero. And I think that might be one of the possibilities of what they're going to try to do on the COMEX, do a flash crash type of thing and then turn off trading and nobody has to pay up in physical silver.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Welcome, Bix. This is Dr. Steve speaking, and thank you very much for granting us this interview. My question is regarding your road to Rooter theory. What recent information do you have or have seen that further supports your road to Rooter theory?
It's interesting because almost everything I look at in the news today, I look at it with a little slant of, how does this relate to the road to Rooter theory? The biggest thing that has happened in the last week or week and a half is the end of behavioral finance. And what I mean by that is behavioral finance is this theory that if you pretend that a market is strong and you tell your nation that, hey, everything's fine, that people will go out and spend and it'll thus make it fine. And Larry Summers taught that at Harvard. And he was a big proponent of that in 2009 when Obama brought him in as part of his economic team. I told all my subscribers that they're gonna bump the stock market. You just watch. We've hit the bottom because everything that was coming out of the White House was saying we've bottomed out, everything's glorious. Then they went in and primed the market. Well, Summers is now out. Austin Goolsbee, who is also a behavioral finance guy, just left last week. And then Peter Diamond, who is an MIT professor of behavioral finance, was rejected as a Federal Reserve board member. So what I'm seeing out of Washington now is the end of I'm going to pump the market and pretend everything's good. I think now they're removing these people so that the collapse can go forward. So it should be a very interesting summer.
Absolutely. Bix, another question I have is one that's from Turd Ferguson. Turd wants to know, with COMEX registered silver at all-time lows, is the COMEX now settling future contracts almost exclusively with paper silver extracted from the SLV ETF?
First of all, I love Turd Ferguson stuff.
ELV, I'm sorry. The SLV ETF.
Right. Turd Ferguson is great. He's doing a great job out there fighting the battles on the silver and gold side. When it comes to COMEX registered inventories of silver, I think it's a very visible thing. All these warehouses are owned and controlled by the banks. If you run down who's in charge of posting those numbers, it's the banks. And we've heard stories of I think it was Scotiabank reporting that they have all this silver and gold in inventory, and then people go there and they don't see it. I don't believe any of the COMEX information for the very simple reason. If you look at Eric Sprott's ETF fund for silver, it was a silver-backed fund, a real one. He went into the COMEX and tried to get about 15 million ounces. He already had 10, I think that was the number, and he needed 15. It took him 3 months to get 15 million ounces. That whole time, the COMEX registered ounces was way over 15. It was 40, 50 million ounces. So for Eric Sprott to go in and say, all right, these are registered ounces, they're ready to be delivered, and then not be able to get anything for 3 months, and some of those bars were made after he stood for delivery, it gives you an idea that this whole thing about COMEX registered ounces and COMEX, any reporting coming out of the warehouses that are controlled by the CME who owns the COMEX or by the banks that control the daily price of silver, you cannot believe any of it because most likely they're lies.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Steve. Our next question is from forum member Aviator. Bix, how do you see the ending of QE2 at the end of this month unfolding? Are we likely to see a crisis like 2008 October that forces QE3, or will things limp along until fall or longer?
I don't see QE2, QE3, QE4 as being any kind of stake in the ground that's going to cause any kind of crash. I think Ron Paul seems to think they're going to go for QE3. Ron Paul's in the know with the good guys. If they do put a stake in the ground and say, no more, we're stopping the debt ceiling, no more QEs, things like that. What they want right now is for the banks to crash because of the deceit that they have been living under for so long. So a more likely scenario for the coming spark of the crash, we can kind of see it now. It's starting. But a big spark, I think, is going to be some revelations in the mortgage fraud area, which was gigantic, as in, some of these mortgage-backed securities didn't even have houses attached to the mortgage. It was pure fraud, and a lot of it was sold off to China. China's not happy about it. So I think it's more likely that the good guys want the tipping point to come and point arrows directly at the banksters so that they are at fault when this crash happens.
Thanks, Bix. Do you think the banksters are in a rock and a hard place at this moment? Is this the time where based on your road to Ruta theory, where the good guys can move and change what the plans of the bankers are?
Yes. Now is the time. You can see it from what Jamie Dimon is saying. He's coming out saying some pretty nasty stuff about what he's going to do to the economy if the U.S. doesn't raise the debt ceiling, or if no QE2 or QE3 is put in place. He is kind of the lead guy on the bankster side, and he put his guy Bill Daley as Obama's right-hand man. He's sitting right next to Obama every day now, telling him what to do. So this is the point where the good guys have a chance to stick a stake through the heart of these vampire bankers.
Should be an interesting 6 months.
Exactly. And that all comes in line with what Cliff High is saying as well.
For sure, and many others, definitely. Bix, many economists look at the financials, whether they be fundamentals or charting, and ignore external effects and possible black swan events. When doing your forecasts for gold and silver and stocks, etc., do you take into account things such as climate change, increasing earthquakes and volcanoes, and peak oil or peak name your resource, having reached unsustainable levels to support 7 billion people? In fact, environmental issues may have already reached a tipping point and changed the playing field forever, and ordinary forecasting models, financial forecasting models, are no longer applicable. Can you tell me if you look at these things and perhaps try to account for them in your forecasts?
I really don't, and here's why. I don't really try to forecast gold and silver. I know I've thrown some huge prices out there for silver. And the reason I don't try to say, this is my model or this is my forecast is because I know that gold and silver are rigged. Every single day, every single trade, the computer programmers who rig the markets decide where to put the price of gold and silver. You could have a nuclear bomb go off on top of the COMEX, and if the computer isn't there, it would make it so that the price of gold did not move an inch. So to say that there's outside influences that can sway a model for your future price of gold or silver, it's just not true. I believe that, in my early days of studying gold and silver back in 2001, 2002, yes, that was my focus. A lot of it was the future is so dim. They're printing so much money. There's all these possibilities of a black swan event, an earthquake. All this will affect the price of gold and affect the price of silver. But over time, usually the exact opposite would happen in the gold and silver markets because it is those times of stress that the banking cabal needs to keep the lid on gold and silver prices. That's why they made this latest slam of silver down from $50 to $35. You can't have people in times of stress running to gold and silver if you're going to continue to function in an unbacked monetary system.
Thanks, Bix. Okay, the next section we're going to be discussing is the metals and silver section. And next question is from Perseus.
Hi, Bix. Bix, over the last few years, I've developed a kind of internet addiction to staring at Kitco charts, and basically, what's obvious to me is the silver market's heavily manipulated. What's so important about the silver market that makes it so important and so pervasive and blatant, the manipulation in this particular market?
It's an excellent question, and the answer is gigantic. The answer is that silver and gold are the only alternative to an unbacked fiat money system. It's an organic alternative because silver and gold have the history of being money for so long. Prior to 71 and prior to the 60s, gold and silver throughout history was the most used form of money for various reasons. One, it's rare, it's divisible, it's precious, it has stood the test of time, especially when an unbacked fiat money system fails, which there have been 3,000 currencies that have failed. Every single time it goes back to gold and silver. So the United States and the banks around the world know this, and this is what the banksters fear. And Alan Greenspan knew it back in, he wrote the paper in the 60s, Gold and Economic Freedom. He was hired by Gerald Ford to run the Council of Economic Advisors, which implemented the rigging of the markets of gold and silver to prolong this fiat money system. This is the whole idea behind the road to Ruta. If you have an unbacked currency, you have to control the price of all natural resources. Otherwise, people would just rush into gold, rush into silver. Everybody would doubt the value of this paper money. So that's kind of the whole concept behind, you have to keep, especially gold, silver, and oil, because oil factors into this as well. But gold, silver, and oil are the most important resources that you must contain if you're going to have an unbacked currency system.
Okay, Bix. With that in mind, then, how long do you estimate it to be before the banks actually experience a failure to manipulate the price of precious metals via the futures market to maintain this dollar hegemony?
I wish I knew. Over the years, I had thought that it was going to happen with the first crash. Well, not even the first crash. The first time that the road to Ruta theory, the first time they tried to take the banks out was in 1987, 2 weeks after Greenspan was put as the head of the Federal Reserve Bank. You had that Black Monday stock market crash. That was the first time they take them out. They tried to take them out, and it wasn't big enough. Then there were small crashes, but nothing that was orchestrated by the good guys to get rid of these banksters. Until you had, after 9/11, changed everything. That was a seminal point in the implementation of the gold standard, this whole thing, the reason they allowed manipulation. After 9/11, they said, no more of this. We're going to take these banksters out. That's when they basically got rid of all the rules behind regulations behind derivatives and things like that. Gave the bankers enough rope to hang themselves, and then they tried to take them out in 2008. Now, it was close, and what happened in the end is the people of the United States weren't ready for it yet. They allowed Hank Paulson to go in there with a gun and hold up Congress, and Congress gave him all this money, and they allowed it to go on for a couple more years. We're at that point now. This is the third attempt. This will probably start sometime this summer. It'll be the third attempt, and it's all going to come crashing down at once. gold and silver manipulation cannot end before everything crashes because it'll cause the crash. So it might happen the same time, it might happen a few days before, but once gold and silver are allowed to trade freely, you can kiss everything else goodbye that's related to an unbacked fiat currency or a derivative.
It's fascinating. Just the first time I came across your work was when I read an article you wrote on the silver that was used in the Manhattan Project, the Calutron. And some estimates I've read suggest that it was 14,700 tons used in that project. Could you discuss your theory behind that silver was used to flood the market, or?
Well, it's an amazing story, and this is the story of the Manhattan Project, where they built this city to create the first atom bomb. What they needed these gigantic magnets to separate the uranium, and they said they needed copper for these magnets, but what they actually needed silver. They said, well, since copper was in short supply in World War II, we had to go to the Treasury to borrow it's about 500 million ounces of silver. Well, the reality is silver is a better conductor of electricity, and it makes for a better magnet than copper. So the whole story behind the copper thing didn't make any sense at all. But this silver, it was 500 million ounces, was taken out of Treasury, melted down, and used as in their Calutron, which is the name of the magnets, to purify the uranium and to make the first atom bomb. Well, supposedly after about 3 or 4 years after World War II, they said, the official story was that so there would be no reason for the United States of America to shut down the most important facility that has ever been invented in the history of the world just to take silver that was sitting in a vault, that was taken out to make these magnets, and then to put it back into the vault and say that, we've replaced all the monetary silver. They wouldn't risk it. And they didn't risk it. And it wasn't until the early 1990s that the Calutrons were actually shut down. And this was announced, after 20 or 30 years, it no longer was a secret. But this was announced in early 1990s that they have shut down the Calutrons, and they actually showed pictures of the casings. And basically what they did is, I believe they needed that silver, the physical silver, to go back in the market to help with the manipulation of the price of silver, because it was the mid-90s that everybody thought silver was going to run out. And as kind of a proof of this, if you look at the USGS, which is the United States Geological Survey, and they track exports of silver from the United States, you look at like 1990, I think it was 94 through 97, the exports of silver jumped by, I think it was 300 million ounces. And, the idea behind that is they exported that silver to London, to the LME, to supply the LME with silver so that they can carry on with the rigging of the silver market, so they can carry on with the, unbacked monetary system. It's an amazing story, and there have been books written about it. Not my theory that all that was melted, remelted and put into the market, but the silver story and the silver magnets is fact, and it's been admitted by, even you take a tour through the Manhattan Project now, and they talk about the silver that was borrowed from the Treasury.
Thanks, Bix.
Yeah.
Thanks, Perseus, and thanks, Bix. Bix, in your opinion, what causes silver to spike to $1,000 an ounce? That's about 25 times current levels. Do you think the commodity exchanges would need to collapse, or the US government would need to default on its debt, or the euro collapses, before we reach such extreme levels? So in summary, what triggers the rise of gold, and especially silver, to $1,000?
Well, I think it's worth a lot more than $1,000 now. The price of silver is being suppressed every day. with a lot of power behind it. They're getting cover from the CFTC. The $1,000 number I threw out there, I've thrown out 7,000, I've thrown out 70,000. It all depends on if they try to keep this scam going, the scam of rigging commodity prices to preserve the dollar, preserve the unbacked currency. $1,000 silver, it would happen in a hyperinflationary type of situation. Do I think $1,000 silver would happen? No, I don't. I think there will be a total collapse once silver hits, $100 or $200, because JP Morgan has 50 billion in silver derivatives, and they have the gigantic short position. They would be taken out. If the system stays intact, the $1,000, silver number will come true. Cliff High has it kind of going up to $80 before the whole market shuts down. That high number for silver, you may think it's high, but silver's worth a lot more than that today if it was freely traded. Does that answer that? Kind of?
It does. Thank you, Bix. Dr. Steve, you got a question for Bix?
What was your opinion of the recent so-called drive-by shooting of the silver market, where silver was dropped 30% in just over 8 trading days?
That was it was for a lot there had been a lot of new silver people that came into the market, anywhere from $25, which is the number in January, to May 1st. A lot of brand new people came in, were all excited. They were learning the silver story, all the good things about silver. My take on what happened, it was orchestrated. It was allowed to go from $25 in January to $50 to get as many people in as possible, and then it was slammed down, all using computers. I believe it was done by Bill Daley and his group at JP Morgan. And Bill Daley is now on, he came in to the Obama White House as his chief of staff on February, I think it's 15th, or January 15th or 16th of this year. The week after he came in, you can almost draw with a ruler a straight line to $50 over the next 3 months. And then they slammed it. And it was purposeful. It was on a Sunday night. It was done with computers, market rigging. You had the CME and all the brokerage houses jacking up the margin requirements. This was a coordinated attack, and they do it pretty well. I've been through a lot of them. I rode through the one from $21 down to $8. But an interesting thing about this is that if you look at the large JP Morgan manipulations, and I've been watching them for a long time. Some of the large ones is the price of natural gas went from $15 to $6 and then to $4 right after JP Morgan was allowed to trade it. That was them slamming it down. Then they bought the hedge fund Amaranth for pennies on the dollar and made billions. Same thing they did with silver a few years back, from 21 to 8. This time they've done it, they've knocked it from 50 to 35. The question is, will they go for the same type of slam down to $25 where they started in January? They can with computer programs. They can with the CFTC not stopping them. Will they do it? I don't know. But if you're worried about that, you're not thinking about silver correctly. Silver should be taken, your physical silver investments should be taken out of the hands of all the banksters. Take it home, bury it in a safe, whatever you can do to get it out of their hands, because the price of silver is not $50, it's not $25, it's not $1,000. Nobody knows what the true fair market value of silver is, because every day millions of ounces of paper silver are traded to set the price back and forth to each other. So I think it was yes, it was a setup. Everybody's fairly certain of that. Will it go down to 25 like, JP Morgan has done in the past? I don't know, but, keep your silver out of the market so it doesn't matter to you. You're counting how much silver you have in ounces and not in dollars.
Okay. Why isn't the organizations that are responsible for following up and overseeing these manipulations, why aren't they doing their job?
Well, first of all, they haven't, since they have never, really. But, it's part of the road to Ruta scenario is that in order to rig the markets, you're going to have to, this is from the 1970s on, when the CFT, this version of the CFTC was put in place. You have to run cover for these banks who rig the markets. You can take out the good ones. You can do things within the regulators, the SEC and the CFTC. The interesting thing about the CFTC is for 30 years, it was known as the joke of the regulators. All the worst attorneys would go to the CFTC and they had the worst employees. And then they'd put a few very high connected corrupt people. So you had a bunch of people who weren't very smart, and then you had a couple of the market riggers running the show. So the CFTC never even has been there. There has been a change. Ever since we got the new commissioners in, and the last of the crooked commissioners left a while ago. All the commissioners now know exactly what's going on, know where the CFTC was before. They're learning about the manipulation of gold and silver. They're slowly coming around. They are not going to cause the crash. They're not going to stop the manipulation. What they will do is when the time is right to take these bankers out and the crash begins, they're going to implement all these rules and laws so that they can't get out of the crash like they got out last time.
Right. Just recently, I think the other day, an article about the CFTC said that they need more money to do their job properly, basically to oversee all the potential manipulation or whatever they claim is going on. So I agree. My next question, Bix, is Ted Butler was recently interviewed by Jim Cook. Mr. Butler thinks the entire takedown was to have strong hands acquire a tremendous amount of silver. It was the only way to get that much. He claimed approximately 150 million ounces were taken out. He thinks someone bought it for a good reason, and that is going to go up, and a lot. Do you agree with him, and why?
First of all, I always agree with Ted. The guy's brilliant. I've told him this before, and I think he has a mole inside the CFTC who helps him out because some of the stuff he comes out with is just, he's too smart for his own good. Yes, I do believe that that's what happened. Now, the question lies in when you say, it was definitely a physical manipulation because JP Morgan didn't cover any of their shorts like they usually do on the slams. So you had a whole bunch of silver coming out of the SLV. You've got, nobody knows how much silver was traded hands on the LME because, it's kind of the secret world over there. But there was a lot of physical that traded hands. Now the question is, yes, did they go to strong hands? Yes, I believe they did. Are those strong hands good hands or bad hands? Are those strong hands, JP Morgan, are they going to use that 150 million ounces to continue to try to suppress the physical market? I don't know. I think a lot of silver did change hands, but I don't know who has that silver now.
Okay, Dr. Steve looks like he's having some technical difficulties, but I've got a question for you, Bix. This is a question from MTY forum member. What Sinclair and Turk are stepping out and saying that fireworks are in our future in the weeks ahead. Are you in agreement, and what do you see?
Definitely. Now, you can even see it in the language coming out of Washington and coming out of Wall Street that everybody and their mothers given up on the behavioral finance. Things are great, and everybody's saying get ready for the second round of the crash. And it makes sense that JP Morgan would slam the silver market a month before the large takedown of the entire system happened. Now, that doesn't mean that gold and silver are necessarily going to shoot higher. They should, yes, they should. The question is, will the market riggers allow it? And I've said it many times that the price of gold and silver will continue to be manipulated as long as computers are allowed to trade in these markets. When the crash happens and everybody sees how fraudulent the market activity is, it's going to be a long time before any computers are allowed to trade stocks, bonds, gold, silver, you name it. So, there's definitely action right around the corner. Whether or not silver and gold will shoot up or shoot down, it all depends on where the computer riggers want it to go. So the only way to survive something like that is to get your physical and get the hell away from any market-related price action.
Okay. Cliff High, whose research and WebBot reports who you know of and are read worldwide, claims that we will see $5 and even $20 rallies in silver, all due to the drop in the dollar and collapse of the system. When do you think it is probable, and do you agree with him with his amount of rise?
Like I've said, I think they can put it anywhere they want, put the price anywhere they want on a given day. It does make sense that the good guys will attack the bankers in the silver market because that's where the bankers are most vulnerable. And if the good guys have the CFTC on their side, which I believe they do now, the good guys can release their computer programs as well, and the bad guys will, get busted for rigging the market. There's been investigations. There's been whistleblowers. The CFTC has plenty of evidence to bust JP Morgan at any moment. And I do think that moment is coming. And it'll most likely be this summer at some point. So, Cliff's numbers, yeah, it's more than likely that would take place. But that doesn't mean that, silver's worth $20 more or $20 less. In a market that's rigged every day with computers, you can place that price anywhere you want. I tell everybody, don't look at the price because, it'll give you a heart attack. The gyrations are going to be crazy. We've just scratched the surface with the slam from $50 to $35. I think, wait for $100 swings in the price of silver, up and down.
Okay. Are you concerned about confiscation at all regarding either gold or silver?
I am. It is not the conclusion of the Road to Ruta. On the Road to Ruta analysis, we go back to a gold and silver standard, and there is free coin mintage of your, they'll melt down your jewelry and give you a coin, and it's a true gold and silver standard, not a leveraged system. But in getting there, will Obama announce the confiscation of mining properties? Will he announce the confiscation of physical metal? Will he announce the confiscation of warehouse metal? I think it's more than likely that there will be a lot of announcements like that when gold and silver cut loose. Especially if it's as bad as I think, which is a total destruction of the fiat money system. I think because the government has known about this for so long and known it was coming for so long, they have made contingency plans. I believe the U.S. has more gold than anybody can even imagine. And they are prepared to turn it into coin, and they have silver as well, but just not as much. And they've been preparing for this since the mid-'70s. So there are mountains of gold eagle coins and coins we can use as our next currency because I do believe they have prepared for it. And, with the opening of the San Francisco Mint announced just recently, more and more signs are coming out that this is kind of which way they are going.
Okay. Would you be a buyer of physical silver and gold at these levels?
At any level. I've tried to time the silver market for the last 10 years, and the only thing you can be, and once you realize that the the banksters and the people who control the price of silver can put it at $0 or put it at $1 million in the same amount of keystrokes on a computer. You kind of don't think about, trying to buy right, because unless you're in the know, one of the banksters who are in the know, you won't know when a bottom is in. And usually when the bottom is in silver, there's no physical for you to buy. So yes, I'm a buyer at $35. I'll be a buyer at $10. I'll be a buyer at $100. I am any extra investment money I have, I'm going to go out and buy a couple coins, and that's a way to deal with this situation without losing your mind.
Okay. Would you suggest buying other countries' bullion in addition to ours, or would you just stick with one particular one? Would you be a buyer of coins versus bars? What's your opinion on that?
It's interesting because it all depends on how the crash goes down. Because I live in the United States, I tend to buy U.S. Silver Eagles and Gold Eagles. And the reasoning for me is that because they are U.S. currency, they fall under the currency protections of counterfeiting. Whereas, a counterfeit 1 ounce Krugerrand would more fall along the lines of fraud. A counterfeit U.S. Gold Eagle would count along the lines of fraud, as well as counterfeiting currency, which are stronger laws. Now, that's thinking too much. What I tend to tell people is stick to small denominations. They're harder to counterfeit. Buy one of those little digital scales. Always weigh your coins. And just stick with, I love the pre-1965 silver U.S. coins because they're very small denominations, and what people tend to forget is that if, say, silver goes to $1,000 an ounce, you buy a 100-ounce bar, that's $100,000 that you're going to have to try to cash in, and there'll be fewer and fewer places that could handle the big bars. So if you stick to coins, 1 ounce coins, and the pre-1965 silver coins, that's where I tend. I don't have multi-billion dollars to throw at it. I wish I did. I would have ended this a long time ago. And it won't take much to end the silver game. Once the billionaires say, give me some silver so I can protect myself, that game is over.
Why aren't the billionaires and the very wealthy people doing exactly as you just stated? Why aren't they buying, tens of millions of dollars of gold and silver bullion as an investment?
Well, it's interesting. I think more and more are becoming aware, but when you think about it, if they do that, most of their investments are in different things that require the system to continue to function. So if you have a multimillionaire or multi-billionaire who owns a lot of companies and trades goods around the world and things like that, and he says, "Oh, I'm gonna end this silver manipulation game," he'll go buy all the silver and they'll, the rest of his wealth will be destroyed. So that might be part of it on the big scale. Warren Buffett went in and bought some. I do believe that Warren is part of the good guys. I think he was blackmailed into selling it. He is working with the good guys and at some point will turncoat on Goldman Sachs and say, we're done with you. His father was a gigantic gold bug who fought the banksters forever, and Warren, most of his career, except for the last couple of years, has fought the banksters. So I think his turncoat move after the first crash in 2008 is just a scam. I think he's trying to entice the banksters to do the same thing, lever themselves up again so we have another shot at taking them down.
Okay. Would you suggest buying more silver than gold right now, or more gold than silver right now? And what kind of ratios would you think that we're going to head to regarding gold and silver? 10 to 1, 3 to 1, 5 to 1, 20 to 1?
I would guess 1 to 5. I think silver is much more valuable than gold for various reasons. The first reason, there's a whole lot more above ground gold than there is silver, even in the reported figures. Now, there's also a lot of secret gold out there above ground and below ground. I think gold is, every time the U.S. finds a gold mine on their property, they hide it, they put it in a military base. They're not going to let anybody touch it until after the crash. So I am heavily weighted towards silver. It's a more important metal in that not only is it money like gold, it's also the best conductor of electricity. It's used in so many things. Our lives would change if there was no silver available. And a lot of people were saying, $50 silver would, all this, manufacturing would stop and everybody would be hoarding silver and people wouldn't be able to make cell phones or computers. And we see that isn't true. You don't hear much about manufacturing of iPhones stopping because the price of silver went up to $50. It's used in such a small amount in every application that it's going to take a really high price for silver to stop the industrial demand.
Right. Well, just the other day, China announced that they're going to invest $10 billion into Europe for solar energy projects. And as you know, solar uses a tremendous amount of silver actually per weight, as other applications use. What do you think of that?
I don't know the specifics of that, but I would imagine there was something else going on in the background for China to put $10 billion into solar projects in Europe. There's a difference in China. When they announce something like that, there's usually something else going on in the background. They don't do it just to do it. They did it for a purpose. And
I think Germany's closing down their nuclear plants, aren't they? Isn't there talk?
Yeah. I did hear about that. Obviously with the Fukushima issues going on right now, that the whole nuclear complex, which was all the environmentalists were all excited a year ago about the nuclear complex. I think there's troubles. There's a perception problem right now. As long as nothing happens in the U.S., it'll fade away. But I do think there are things that can easily happen in the U.S. So all it takes is one more, either the information about Fukushima comes out that it was and is much worse than people said, or a new accident, and the whole nuclear, complex is in deep trouble.
Okay, well, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Steve. Thank you, Bix. What we'll do is we'll just have a quick 2-minute break, if you don't mind.
Sounds good.
Thanks. Okay, we're back with Bix Weir, and we're continuing our discussion on the metals, gold, and silver markets. The next set of questions is from RTG.
Hello, Bix. This is RTG. Bix, my line of question zeroes in on the London OTC gold market. Okay? So, you've previously stated, and it's been stated on the GATA website, as well as in congressional testimony by former Goldman Sachs analyst Jeffrey Christian, that the amount of gold bullion trading volumes exceeds the registered bars in the depositories by a factor of over 100 to 1, and that the current system does in fact operate on a razor-thin fractional reserve basis. Now, if any large bullion investor were to actually demand physical bullion, such action could quickly lead to a breaking of the bank that sold the bullion, as well as a run on the entire paper gold system. Okay, now further, gold availability in London has recently been observed to be so tight that the LPMCL, that's London Precious Metals Clearing Limited, has actually been caught red-handed by GATA's Adrian Douglas, assigning multiple CUSIP numbers to the same bullion bar. Well, now, given all these observations, in your opinion, how much longer can the LBMA maintain this current charade they're calling a bullion market?
Well, they've maintained it for 30 years, 40 years, and it's always been like that. The short answer is that if you look at the London bullion market, it's a closed system market where you have your participants trading back and forth. Theoretically, they call it a physical market, but in reality, the amount of silver and gold that trades there on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, is massively more than what is available and what is mined every year. But this is it's come to light since the Jeffrey Christian the CFTC meeting where Christian said that. David Morgan wrote about it years ago. I've written about it years ago. The reality of gold and silver is that the physical side of the gold and silver market is tiny. It is minuscule. So when you look back at all those years of trading over the past 30 years of trading, COMEX, silver and gold, those are futures and options contracts. All these things traded back and forth are gold and silver derivatives and have really nothing to do with the underlying metal. So yes, if someone came in and said, well, I want to take delivery of say 50 million ounces of silver, they wouldn't have it. They'd probably get paid off and asked to walk away or get threatened.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it could just happen at any time then.
Yes. The thing is that if someone is doing it maliciously to shut down the market, you have to remember that when you're trading on the LME or the COMEX, you are playing by their rules at all times. And this was just seen on the COMEX when they raised margins on the slam. They kept raising margins to slam it further. It was seen when the Hunt brothers got busted in the early 80s. What they did to take them out, they had a 90 million ounce long position, and the COMEX came in and said, okay, no more buying silver, only selling, and the price went down from $50 to $10. It's their rules. They tell you if you can pull out 50 million ounces or 10 million ounces or anything. They can change the rules on you at any moment. So if someone comes in to try to do that maliciously and the exchange doesn't want it done, they can stop it in a blink of an eye.
Okay. All right. Well, given that the Bank of England is supposedly supervising these day-to-day operations of the LBMA, how much actual legal responsibility does it have to ensure that the 6 clearing members meet their responsibilities to deliver bullion as agreed?
I would say none. Just like the CFTC. Okay. The CFTC is kind of the overseer of the COMEX, and they haven't been busted since they've been around, even though there's been whistleblowers. There's a Judge Painter, a CFTC judge, sent in his resignation letter, and in that letter he said the other judge, Judge Levine, told him 30 years ago or 20 years ago that he promised Wendy Graham he would never find anybody guilty of manipulation.
Right.
So, I mean, when it gets to regulators, how much trouble did the SEC get in for the Bernie Madoff scandal? None, and they were involved in it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, these investors I was talking about are, they're like cash buyers. And that's could they, I guess with the practices of the LBMA and the LPMCL, they've now been laid bare for all to see. A great bit of the credit goes to you and the work of Geda. All right. Does this leave these institutions, as well as the U.S. and U.K. governments, vulnerable to blackmail by the Chinese, Russians, Indians, Arabs, or anyone else with the means to break the bank by delivering a large quantity of bullion and then making it public that they were denied?
Of course. Yes. I mean, the gold and silver world is a very dangerous game when you're playing it at the upper levels, at the government level, at the the bullion banker level. There's a very interesting report on my website under the resources category at www.roadtoruta.com, and it's called Collateral Damage. And it is a report about 9/11 and the roots of 9/11, how it happened, who did it, where it all came from. But it goes back to the early financing of the banking cabal and all the gold that got pulled out of the Philippines to fund it back in the after World War II. Really interesting report if you're interested in finding out how dangerous the real gold bullion world is.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for all that.
You're welcome.
Thank you, RTG. And we are talking with Bix Weir at roadtoruta.com. The next set of questions is from Romans.
Hi, Bix. This is Romans 828. It's Drew back at you.
How are you?
I'm doing fine. I've got several questions here for you. The first one I'd like to know is, can you discuss a little bit all the hidden gold stashes in the U.S., like this Grand Canyon gold and Chocolate Mountain gold, etc.?
Yeah, it's some of my favorite stuff to research and think about. There's a lot of gold that is out there, both above ground and below ground. You'll hear official numbers from GFMS and the CME group that the total amount of gold ever mined in the world was about 160,000 tons. That number is completely false and so far off, it's kind of embarrassing. The real number, nobody really knows the real number, but the real number should be above 1 million tons. So, 6-7 times the amount of gold ever mined is the actual number of how much gold is out there. Now, gold is very important because back in before 1971, it was used as money. So a big influx of gold, for example, into the United States would have meant a devaluing currency. So one of the first large discoveries of physical gold, and probably the largest, is in the Grand Canyon. And they found this gold, this is all off of some articles back in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. I'm not sure which one it was, but this is in like 1906. They found huge deposits of gold in the Grand Canyon. They said the announcements were this is going to change the world. The United States was going to be rich. All of a sudden, they shut off every communication about this find. And the reason they did that is that they did not want to destroy the U.S. dollar, which was backed by gold at that time. If you introduced a gigantic find of gold, say 3 times as much as is currently in circulation, you would devalue that currency to 1/4 of its value. So they didn't, I don't know if they mined it, but they definitely cordoned it off. It is now a no-go zone, a military base in the Grand Canyon. They say the caves are too dangerous to go in there. Nobody knows really how much gold is in there. There's another mine in Chocolate Mountain, which is in California. And this was found, I believe, in the 80s. And they flew all these congressmen out there to see it. It's another one that is put right in the middle of a military base. You can't go in there. But at the time, it was supposed to be the largest gold mine in the world by far. Now, it gets back to the same thing of what does the U.S. want to do with their natural reserves? Would we rather buy everybody else's with these pieces of paper that we can create out of thin air, or should we dig up our own reserves and use them first? The thing to do, the United States has done, is always use other people's natural resources first. And the big above ground find, besides there was a lot of Nazi gold supposedly that was confiscated by the U.S. and used in the CIA and to fund some of our dark operations and things like that. But the really big one was Yamashita's gold. And Yamashita's gold is the gold that the Emperor of Japan was hiding, that he had looted throughout Asia and was hiding in the Philippines and hid them in, I think, 80 or 90 caves and tunnels and secret booby-trapped spots that MacArthur, one of MacArthur's generals, found, and the United States decided back then to dig up as much of this gold as possible and use it in the dark ops and all the secret operations for funding of those operations. And they set up a lot of the banking cabal with that gold. And an amazing book called Gold Warriors was written by Sterling and Peggy Seagrave, and it documents all this to the nth degree. I mean, you have physical documents, you have congressional testimony, and the amount of gold. I think they estimate it to be 300,000 tons of gold. When right now the amount of gold supposedly that's ever been mined since the beginning of time is 160,000 tons. But if all that gold came into the market, the U.S. dollar would be devalued. So the U.S. said, we're gonna keep this a secret, and that's kind of how the banking cabal grew up around that stash of secret gold. And Barrick Mining, that's how they got their start. They weren't actually a physical mine type of company. They were set up to launder the Yamashita's gold, supposedly. None of this is proven fact, and I'm sure everybody and their mother can poo-poo it. But there is a lot of documentation, and it's kind of hard to not come to the conclusion that Yamashita's gold is real and has been used in the dark ops.
Well, that sure is a fascinating story, and I sure look forward to hearing more come out about all that.
I've got some on my website. I've got some stories about it. There's one article called "Golden Secrets" that deals in a lot of the secret gold mines and things like that.
I see. Okay, thanks. Now, shifting gears a bit here, this whole story about the 1.4 million 400-ounce gold-clad tungsten bars hasn't really come out into the light of day, in my opinion. I was just wondering what you think about that whole situation and how that would come into play with your theories.
I know about it. In my theory, it doesn't play very large because it's not a significant amount of gold, given that I think there's, a million tons instead of 160,000 tons. But having said that, it does make sense in the road to Ruta theory, in that the road to Ruta theory says we're going to drag this thing out as long as possible. We're going to print unbacked fiat money for as long as possible. And in doing so, we're going to have to rig the gold and silver markets for as long as possible. Now, I do think there have been times when they've run out of gold. It's very likely that the bad guys went into Fort Knox and melted that gold and fabricated tungsten bars. It wouldn't be hard to do. It would explain why they don't allow any audits of the gold that's supposedly there. So, yes, I believe it could be true. I don't know if it is or if it isn't, but I do think there's a lot more gold out there than people think. So I wouldn't use that as, a type of, hey, gotcha type of thing, other than the people who bought those bars. And it is very, very rare for anybody to buy a large bar of gold and drill it and test it. That's the amazing thing. Just because it's certified by, the COMEX warehouses or the LME warehouses doesn't mean that inside that bar isn't some tungsten. And I think that's what happened in China is the rumor that they drilled some of the bars and found that some of them aren't pure gold. I think something like that happened up in Canada at the Royal Bank of Canada when they were minting some. I think it was gold coins. They were taking bars and melting them down, and all of a sudden they were missing inventory. I think they had bought some gold bars that had tungsten in them. But I don't know this stuff as fact, and people will run with it, and it sounds very plausible to me, and it would fit in the road to Ruta theory because it's all about deception. And if they you heard Hank Paulson when we were going through the 2008 crash, he said, "We will do everything in our power to fix this." That what does that mean? They will do everything. They will break the law. They will kill, steal, rob, you name it. And that's what they've been doing for, decades.
Thanks, Romans. The next section we'll be discussing is the corruption section. Romans, can you continue, please?
Yeah, Bix, can you please speculate on how you believe the precious metal market manipulations will end? Specifically, is there a specific event that you believe that would occur to cause the doors to be blown off the whole story?
I think it will end with the crash of everything. It might be the cause of the crash to initially start it. In 2008, I thought it was going to be silver that would be the key thing that was going to kill the banks when it started going over $21. But that didn't happen. The silver back when the first market crash was happening, the silver short position was held by Bear Stearns. And that was definitely a good guy attack on Bear Stearns, on the heart of the banking cabal, by going after their silver position. And the way they got out of that is JP Morgan took it over, basically. So it might be another attack on silver. It might be an attack on JP Morgan. Or it might be revelations about the mortgage scandal. Any way you do it, if the gold and silver manipulation ends, so does everything else. The unbacked fiat money system would be destroyed. And the banks know this because they're knee deep in it. That's why they control it. So, is it going to be the metals that destroy the banking system, or the banking system that destroys themselves? I don't know, but once one of them goes, you can pretty much, it'll be days before the rest of it goes.
Right. I agree with you. I think, there's so many catalysts that could be the tipping point to bring the whole house of cards down. I noticed you had an email that went out today where you mentioned this. Where do you think that Cliff High's quote-unquote rich riot will come into play?
It's interesting because I always love that part of Cliff's analysis, that there would be a rich riot at a bullion depository where the rich people would go and demand their metal, and it'd be known as a rich riot. But two things in the past week have happened that kind of might spark that. The first one was the Kitco problem that happened. I believe it was Friday. Was announced that they're having tax issue problems. They're under investigation. I hear there was a raid. Kitco is an interesting company because they have pooled metal accounts. Now, pooled metal accounts are basically pools of paper. They're supposed to have the real thing behind it, but they sell certificates based on their holding the metal for you. They charge almost nothing, so you can get your gold bullion supposedly for really cheap premiums. The business model is flawed because you don't pay anything for storage, you don't pay anything for insurance. It kind of comes to, okay, then how does Kitco make money if they're going to charge nothing to hold the metal for you? And what they do is they take that money and they invest it in, bonds or something that they get a rated return on. And because they they think that there won't be it's kind of fractional reserve metal holding. Everybody won't cash in their certificates at the same time. Well, the problem now is that Kitco I don't know if they filed for bankruptcy. I know bankruptcy is in the discussion, but what is going to happen to all those people who have those Kitco certificates? Now that might be kind of the start of the rich riots. People going to Kitco saying, hey, I want my metal, and they won't have it. The second thing was just announced today that in the UK, they are investigating JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs warehousing divisions. They talked about aluminum and things like that, but, the corruption in the warehouse, it might start with aluminum, but you'll very quickly get to gold and silver. And I do think this is part of the takedown. This could be the spark that starts the rich riots. Over in the UK, it makes sense that the rich riots would be in the UK because that's where theoretically the bulk of physical gold and silver trading happens. So I'd keep an eye on that announcement today that there's investigations into JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs for warehousing metal. JP Morgan actually, I think it was a few months ago, claimed they have this new thing called virtual warehousing of metal. And I'm like, why don't you just tell everybody there's no real metal in there? It's gotten ridiculous.
Right, I agree. Well, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Thank you.
Actually, Bix, my personal favorite with Cliff's forecast was when China gets so upset with the US and US banking corporations, they actually ask some really high-ranking banking officials to come there, and they use a big sword on them. But anyway, that's me. The next question's for Diane B.
Hi, Bix. I have a question first from Odinson. And we're talking about Kitco not being able to front up with the silver, but as metals become more expensive, what are your techniques going to be for avoiding counterfeiting for metals in hand? And also, if an official conversion or return to a gold and silver standard occurs, what additional verification mechanisms will be available to people?
Excellent question. And, I have thought a lot about this. I have gone to smaller denominations of metals, sticking with 1 ounce coins and, smaller bars and things like that. On a personal level, what I really think is when the crash happens and we decide, oh my God, this unbacked fiat currency thing does not work, we have to go back to gold and silver, there will be a global remelt of all gold, silver, other metals, because there is a lot of fakes out there in the bars now, I believe. I think, SLV might have molybdenum in all those bars that they say they have. I don't know. But when people are buying, all it takes is a spark. And for people to doubt their metal, you're going to have to test that metal. There are ways to test it. I don't like the acid test because it only tests the outside of the metal. I don't like the ping test because, every size and shape of silver has a different ping sound to it. It gets harder and harder and harder. There's a metal analyzer gun that they have. It's very expensive. I've looked into that. It's like $20,000 or $30,000. And I think at some point the value of gold and silver will rise so much that when people buy coins, they're going to want to be absolutely positive that this coin is pure gold or pure silver. And I think the banks will, the banks that are left standing when we restart the financial system will have a way to test, the machines or the guns to test gold and silver for purity. And I think, at least in the U.S., and I think the U.S. Mint is kind of preparing for that now. The San Francisco Mint just had an $80 million supposedly historical refurb done to it, and now they're talking about coining silver dollars out of there, or the silver eagles. So I do think it will become an issue at some point, and once it does become an issue that is visible, everybody's going to question the purity of their own metal and other people's metal that they buy. So it might seriously affect price as well. Meaning that if you can prove that it's pure, it's going to be worth more. And if you can't, it'll be worth less.
True. And if the banks are going to need to know anyway, aren't they, if they're taking it in?
Now, exactly.
It seems that the global monetary meltdown is the only way out of this mess, and that it will be used as a or the creative destruction event. What do you think about this?
That is what is said in the Road to Rooter Teacher's Guide from the Federal Reserve Boston, is that, you know, in that comic, you know, that's kind of the original, you know, take on what is going to happen. They talk about returning to a gold and silver standard. But one of the things they talk about is that they talk about how after a while, countries will start trading with each other. And that got me thinking of, okay, what does a global economic collapse mean, or a currency collapse mean? It will mean the end of globalization. And Alan Greenspan has talked about this since he left the Fed, that the end of globalization will be a shocking thing, because, you know, globalization wasn't always around. You know, it's kicked in really since the 1980s. But, you know, we are such a globalized world now. The death of currencies would mean basically the United States betrayed everybody and killed their currency, which, you know, destroyed everybody's currency, and there'll be a lot of mistrust. But it'll be good for the U.S. because we'll bring all the manufacturing home. All our troops will come home because we can't afford to keep them. You know, no one would want U.S. troops in their land anymore. And we'll, you know, kind of start fresh and you know, reallocate money on a domestic basis at first. There will really be a time when we kind of stick to our own knitting. Every country will have to figure out their own way going forward.
That's great. That sort of answers my next question too, of what happens after the crash. Or do you have anything to add to that?
One thing in the Road to Rooter comic, or in the Wishes and Rainbow comic, which is the first one, the way that Ruta allocates the currency, or, you know, they call them colored flowers. The way she allocates the currency is by age. And that got, you know, analyzing that and going down the path of what Social Security has been like in the United States. Alan Greenspan was in charge of fixing Social Security in the early 1970s. And that's when I think he started the implementation of the computer programs. If you have a crashed U.S. dollar or all fiat money, you've got basically a wipeout of all debt and all assets of electronic or paper form. So you're going to have to reallocate money in some way, because we need money. You're going to have to reallocate money. Now, I'm just talking about the United States. And I think the way they plan to do it is through what you've already paid into Social Security, because and that's why they have a cap on Social Security, and the rich don't have to pay that much, you know, as a percentage of what they make, is that it'll reallocate money to the citizens of the United States based on what they've paid into the system already. And, you know, you might think that Social Security payments are nothing, you know, very small right now, a couple $100. But if a couple $100 is all the money that's out there, it'll be, you know, worth a lot. Well, you know, a couple $100 in gold and silver coin could be a whole different deal then.
So Diane, sorry to interrupt. Bix, just on Diane's question previously, how do you see the collapse occurring? I mean, do you see, obviously, treasury spreads increasing, and then maybe the just-in-time system starts collapsing, then the euro collapses, then the US currency collapses? How do you see possibly a step-by-step the collapse occurring?
I see it very similar, starting very similar to what happened in 2008. The kind of freezing of credit between banks. You know, every bank is levered. You know, they say 20-1, but it's more like 100-1 if you throw in all the derivatives. And as the banks freeze up and the credit markets freeze up, the entire system freezes up and people start, basically there's runs on banks between banks, kind of the same thing going on that was going on in 2008. Now back then they were able to stop it with a lot of fraud and a lot of holding up Congress, and, the Federal Reserve paid European banks billions and billions of dollars to get them straight. So there was a lot of fraud going on and a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on. This time, I think it'll start the same way, but the full force of the good guys is going to come behind it. I do think the CFTC is going to, when the crash starts, is going to implement a lot of these rules and regulations to make sure the banks can't survive it.
Okay. Right. So, on another angle, do you think the bad guys are being removed from power? And if so, why?
Yes. And the why is because it gets back to the road to Ruta theory. At least in the United States, these guys took over pretty much the United States with probably, 1913. They were given a lot of reign when they took over the monetary system, and it's gone on from there, and presidents have talked about it. The military industrial complex, the banking cabal, the Rothschilds, the Illuminati, you name it. They have taken over, and it was the plan of Greenspan and those guys back in the 60s to take the country back, but they had to do it through the monetary system. If you look at, are they being taken down? You look at Bernie Madoff was a great example. There's so much more behind the Madoff situation than they're telling people. And Bernie Madoff was taken down by Michael Mukasey and his son, who was I think he worked in one of the Justice Department offices. But Michael Mukasey was the Attorney General of the U.S., and he's one of the original good guys. And the Madoff thing was, a lot of people don't know how much it involved and how many of the bad guys were involved in that. It was a huge network, a lot having to do with Israel. And, that was one of the big takedowns. There's smaller ones going on. The head of the IMF, he's being taken out, and there's all kinds of little guys dropping left and right now. And more will come, and because there was more fraud, and there are task forces, the FBI, a good part of the FBI, that are going after these guys. And when the crash happens, then they're going to start with the perp walks and try to flush the system out, I believe. But you can see it happening already.
Okay. So do you think that Bernanke is still one of the good guys in light of some of the machinations of the Fed as of late?
Yes, I do. If you look at what Bernanke's doing and you look at what Greenspan's doing, and they're pumping as much money into the system as possible. I would be concerned if they started pulling back the reins and were trying to balance budgets and things like that. But they're not. They're trying to pump as much money into this system to destroy it. And they are doing it. They're doing a great job of it. They're printing money out all orifices at the moment, and it will destroy the U.S. dollar. It is quickly doing it already. And if you look at the plan all along was to print as much as you can, suck out as much benefit as you can until the U.S. dollar is not accepted anymore.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah, next question is from Perseus.
Hi, Bix. Just want to quickly just go back to the counterfeit gold and silver issue. Something I've not really seen covered anywhere is the material properties of the metals that you can use to counterfeit it with. There's molybdenum, which shares the same density as silver, and tungsten, which shares and tungsten that shares the same density as gold. The one property that I've never seen mentioned anywhere is the stiffness. It's what's called flexural rigidity. If you bend molybdenum coin or bar, it's much stiffer, and you won't get you'll get very little deflection. the same with tungsten. So it's a non-destructive test that you can use for. You don't have to drill your bars and remelt them. And
there's I also saw was it like a buoyancy test? And I mean, there are a lot of tests, and you know, I tend to stick to just the coins because I'm not an expert tester, and I know most of my subscribers are, you know, just mom and pops who are trying to save what little they have of savings now. And my advice is always just stick with what you know and what, you know, you can always weigh them. If they look right and feel right, you get a good feel for it.
I use a Fitch coin detector.
Oh yeah, they're expensive, but they're good.
Yeah. I mean, I weighed it up. It cost about $130 or something. But I thought, you know, the price of losing one coin to be fake, it's you know, economically, it's good to spend the money on that detector. So I
did the same thing, and you know, I got it, and I'm like, I just spent $130 on a little tiny piece of plastic, but it was worth it.
Yeah. I know. When it turns up, you think, God, you know, you spent that kind of money on plastic, but it is, yes, it's definitely worth it. Just can we go back to Kitco? We're getting reports at the moment that Kitco has been raided again today, and this is 10 days after the initial reports come out that they've been raided. But we haven't got confirmation of that yet. But what's your hypothesis on what the motivation behind the Canadian government raiding them for the tax fraud? Is it? You know,
I think it's part of the whole thing. I think they're starting to go after the banking cabal. I do think Kitco was involved. I know John Nadler, who you know, everybody laughs. Oh, he's such an anti-gold guy, anti-silver guy. The reality is, John, you look at his resume. He worked for HSBC and then he worked for B of A, instituting their pooled programs, their pooled metal lending programs. He was kind of the inventor of this, silver and gold pooled accounts concept and he brought it to the Perth Bank, the Perth Bank down in Australia, and he brought it to Canada, and he's just, you know, I'm not a big fan of John Nadler's.
No. I read Le Metropole Cafe every night, and, you know, Bill Murphy's always mentions John Nadler. It's quite funny. But just going with regards to the CFTC, then, do you think, without obviously we don't want to get into libelous conversation, but what do you think of Bart Chilton? Is he acting in the interest of the free market, or is he a cleverly disguised agent of the banking community?
No, Bart is extremely smart. He knows what's going on. He can't tell us everything he knows. When he got confirmed because Dianne Feinstein made it happen. And Feinstein's in with the good guys. She's the one who hid all the gold in Chocolate Mountain in California. Right after he got confirmed, he spent 3 hours with Dianne Feinstein, and she basically clued him in on the manipulation of gold and silver and what his job was to clean up the CFTC and the banksters. He plays his role very well. He's very smart. Gensler is very smart. Gensler used to run the official rigging of the U.S. dollar for the U.S. through Goldman Sachs. So it's kind of, Goldman Sachs has kind of a dark side and a good side, believe it or not. But Gensler is now heading it, and all the commissioners know what was going on. They're very smart now. They got rid of, who was that last guy who just recently left?
Oh, yeah. What's his name?
Yeah, he wasn't as bright as the rest, but they're going to get a new guy now, supposedly, who's going to be on the side of the investors instead of J.P. Morgan. So I still, people make fun of me for still. I fight them and I support them at the same time, because I know that the fight motivates people around to see what's going on. But I also know that when it comes time for them to stand up and do their job, it's going to happen.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Bix.
Sure.
Thanks, Perseus. Just another question, Bix. From your interviews and articles, it seems you are very much in the inflationary, even hyperinflationary camp with a forecast of $1,000 silver. What signs would change your mind and lean you towards a more deflationary debt bust? Views similar to Carl Denninger and others.
I think if the system stays intact, if the unbacked fiat money system stays intact, there is no other way to go but hyperinflation or super hyperinflation. There is no other choice. If it doesn't stay intact, if there is a global crash that, kind of like 2008, except without the saving grace of Hank Paulson, if there is a global crash, you can call it deflationary, but all money will go away. So, no one will have any type of thing. So, with the crash of the banks, pretty much every company and every individual will lose everything they have in the banks, in their 401ks and their IRAs and in all their savings accounts, checking accounts, you name it. So if you call that deflationary, that's a possibility as well. If the system stays intact, no, they're going to print and print and print to continue to support the system.
And with the stopping of QE2, I guess it's leading more towards a crash because that's what's held the system up, the additional printing of money, I guess.
Well, it depends if, they might continue to print money and call it or not tell anybody. A lot of what people don't quite get their hands around is this thing called money these days are electronic blips and pieces of paper. There is factories around the world kicking out $100 bills by the billions. They're just pieces of paper with ink. And, to say it's illegal to print $100 bills in North Korea is laughable. Is the Treasury going to go over to North Korea, invade them and steal their printing presses? There's $100 bills all over the place. There's a secret monetary system behind the one we see. So to talk about QE2, QE3, those are the official types of monetary instruments. And there's so much more that goes on in the dark rooms behind, the Federal Reserve and the banks and into the quintillions in the derivative market that, these QE2 and QE3 is just kind of, it's kind of a dog and pony show that they're showing the public, but there's so much more going on in the background.
Yeah, I agree. And you look at the drug cartels and even the counterfeit organizations, I'm pretty sure they have a hand in that as well. The next question is from Odinson.
Hi. Sorry, I came in the middle. We had some interesting weather in New York.
I bet.
Which it was kind of eerie because I read the Kitco thing right at the same time as the weather went wonky. So I was wondering if there's some symbolism with it. And then I saw a giant rainbow. I wonder if there's a pot of gold at the end of it.
You can read anything you want into all that.
So, all right, enough fooling around. Greenspan is quoted as saying the following in the 1960s: "I would love to be the Federal Reserve chairman when the Kondratev winter comes because I think I could override it by dropping the interest rates and printing enough money that it would overcome the deflationary aspects of this economy. If a return to the gold standard and not demonstrating his skill against the K-winner was his primary goal, do you think the K-winner was a cover for setting up catastrophic inflation?"
I think, well, if you look at what Greenspan wanted to do and what he did, he has printed his way pretty much his whole stint as the Federal Reserve chairman. And, he also had a lot of say during the 70s as the head of the CEA. Can he print his way through the whole winter of the long view cycle? I don't think so. I mean, right now where we are is, we should be in the winter of the long cycle. We aren't. We're kind of hovering there and papering our way over it. But when it comes, you can just put it off for so long. When it comes, it's going to hit hard. It's like sitting there on the beach in your bikini and all of a sudden it's 40 below and snowing. That's the kind of, sharp jolt it will be. So, it's interesting. I listen to, I used to look a lot at economic theories and, say, because if we keep printing money, then this will happen. And if we don't cut back on spending, then this will happen. And then once you understand that behind the scenes, there is a little man pulling all the levers, and you get a little more jaded as to what is a real cycle, and are these cycles, man-made? Are they being manipulated from behind the scenes? And, I agree.
I agree. I think that if they are trying to manipulate it, it will inevitably distort how the seasons look. I mean, I can't see how that wouldn't happen, especially with the kind of money, the percentage of money they're printing.
Yeah, it's interesting to see them try to explain away why things that were supposed to happen have not happened.
I have a theory. Actually, you answered one of my follow-up questions in your answer. So that was great. I have a theory that we entered the K winter at the beginning of, the beginning of the K winter was Greenspan's irrational exuberance speech, and that it's basically ending now, which would correlate to basically all this liquidity letting loose in the spring. But I don't know if that makes any sense to you, or if you think that that's valid. I wasn't going to ask that, but you seem to have led right there. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, I don't know. What I see coming is more of a total derivative collapse, banking collapse, fiat money collapse. A lot of people saying, it would take longer, and it might. It might. I see a collapse over the next 6 to 8 months, and then before we kind of hit the bottom, and then trudge along the bottom for a while until life starts to spring somewhere else, and we get our act together a little. I hope it doesn't take that long, because it will be painful.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. I have another question for you about the Road to Ruta and the comic book. Do you think there is sufficient evidence without the Fed comic book tell that the main players of the Fed are actually seeking a fiscal reboot into a metal standard? I'm looking at it as if the comic is a strong lead, like a detective would use, but insubmittable to the public court. Is there sufficient evidence outside the comic to support the theory that the comic indicates?
I do think there's, you mean coming from the Federal Reserve?
Yeah, from other statements, from reports.
Well, yeah, there is
news articles, from whatever.
Yeah. There's. I mean, first of all, if you look at all the data evidence of manipulation, that's that comes to the pretty obvious side that gold and silver are manipulated. As far as the Road to Ruta theory, you have the introduction of the almost introduction of the new $100 bill, which is littered with gold and talk of overthrowing your government. You've got the opening of the San Francisco Mint to mint coins. It was supposed to be a historical retrofit, but they put brand new computer-controlled coining machines in there, and they're ready to go. They've delayed that for 2 years. You got Feinstein and Pelosi were at the opening of that. There's a lot of signs around that the U.S. is ready once the crash happens. The only question left is, when is it going to happen? They tried to do it in 1987. They tried to do it in 2008, and they're going to try to do it, this year or next. Can they do it? Can they take these bankers out once and for all? I think they can. I think the new Dodd-Frank regulations will handcuff the banks in squeezing their way out. But we'll see. I mean, it's obvious that it's kind of the snowball has started rolling downhill, and it should be a crazy summer and into the winter. So hopefully, if they're not ready, if the Federal Reserve and the Treasury are not ready for this, then, and I'm wrong, then we're in deep trouble. And we won't be able to get out of it.
We're probably in deep trouble either way, but.
Well, true, but if I'm right, they have been planning this. There is a system ready to be put in place, or probably just go back to the Constitution, because we did have a good system, and if we just went back to the Constitution, like Ron Paul is saying, then yeah, we could start fresh fairly easily. Whereas other countries who don't have the same kind of, history might have a little harder time.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I have one. Do you think that the U.S. government will end up nationalizing the domestic gold and silver mines?
It's an excellent question, and I've run around time and time again thinking about that. As far as the foreign ownership of mines, yes, I do think that if you owned foreign mining stock, that when the crash happens, all those no one would let a foreigner own what they're going to use as money. So I do think foreign mining companies will, if not nationalized, will only be kind of owned by local citizens of that country. So I don't believe in investing in foreign mining companies, even though the leverage is there. Now, as far as domestic, it's a toss-up, and I know that there is talk of nationalizing a large portion of the United States, from Montana down to Arizona, and because that's where a lot of the gold and silver mines are. But whether or not, I think it all depends on how bad the crash is and how angry people are at the rich, so to speak. Because if they're not nationalized, you're going to see the owners of gold and silver mines being ultra rich, whereas the majority of the population will be ultra poor. And that usually does not fly well in any society. So, the possibility of nationalization would be high in the kind of collapse that I think is coming. So the short answer is I don't know. Ron Paul gave a speech a while back where he kind of hinted, he used to own mining companies. He kind of hinted that you first and foremost want to own physical gold. And I took that as, because he's in the know of, kind of where they're leaning on the good guy's side. So I think nobody knows. So if you own a mining company, I think it's at risk. But the other thing is not necessarily the nationalization of the mine, but all the counterparties between you and your mine. I mean, you've got your brokerage house, you got the DTCC, you've got all those naked shorts out there who all claim to be owners of that mine. It might be a legal quagmire to figure out, who actually does own, this mine. And they might just say, hey, we really don't know how many shares are out there. So, we don't know who owns this thing. We're going to nationalize it and just give it to the people.
Okay. Follow-up question is, do you feel that the plans are actually in place for what we just discussed?
There was an article that I posted on the website a while back that there was a nationalization plan given to Obama of mines and natural resources in the United States if the crash happens, or when the crash happens. Yes, I do. I believe they have a lot of plans for a lot of different scenarios. And some are good and some are bad. If the bad guys take over after the crash, then, we're all pretty much screwed.
Regarding confiscation and storage, would you recommend possibly, if you have the whereabouts and the facilities, to store actual physical metals outside of the country?
No, to me, that makes no sense at all. Because when the crash happens, every country is going to have to look out for themselves. And the theory that if you keep metal, if you're a U.S. citizen, you keep metal in Switzerland because Switzerland has, a more, stronger laws about property rights than the U.S., who, have confiscated metal in the past. I think all those rules and laws will go right out the window with the type of crash that I see coming, which is a total, complete collapse of all debt and all assets on the electronic side and held by banks and mutual funds and things like that. So, to think that you're better off having another country hold your metal, I don't see that.
Okay. Are you storing food and water?
Yes. And, Cliff I probably got me started on it, but there's also in the Road to Ruta theory, there's a transition period. And, if you take away currency, you pretty much stop everything. And, the transportation of goods and services, we're going to have to hunker down for a while all this sorts out. So yes, I am. I'm growing, trying to grow. My green thumb is not so green, but I'm trying to grow some vegetables, and I'm trying to be more self-sufficient, such that if things fall apart in a quick manner, I will be ready to take care of myself and my family and my as many friends as I can take care of. And I think that's a smart thing to do for anyone.
We agree, and thank you very much.
Sure.
This is Diane B. again. I've got a question here from Fox. Could you please elaborate? You were speaking a wee while ago about the new US $100 bill. Could you elaborate on the significance and the hidden meanings in the new $100 bill? You think it's a precursor to the return of the gold standard, correct?
Yes. And if you look at the $100 bill, the $100 bill is the most counterfeited currency in the world by far. They call it a super note. There are counterfeit factories around the world that are kicking out $100 bills. And you might find it interesting that, when the United States started redoing their bills to thwart off the counterfeiters, they started with like the 20 and the 5 and the 10 and the 50. Why wouldn't they start with the $100 bill if it's the highest denomination and it's the most counterfeited? Now the reason, and this was my question for a long time, and that's why, they announced that they were going to do 100 years ago. Probably in 2006 was the first announcement that they were working on the 100. And I was very curious back then about what it would look like, because I knew that this Road to Ruta thing was a possibility, and I think if they were going to, and they kept delaying it, so I'm thinking maybe they're waiting for the crash. And then it came out in 2000, I believe, around 2008 or so, that they were gonna release it, and they had this big ceremony with Bernanke and Geithner, and they showed the bill, and the bill is just it is an amazing bill. If you look at it, it's split near the middle with a big blue line, and on the left side of the bill it looks like a regular 100 greenback, just green and white, and pretty boring. On the right side of the bill, it is filled with gold. It has a gold 100. It has a gold inkwell, a gold feather pin, a gold Liberty Bell. It has gold lettering of the Declaration of Independence. And if you look really close, right above the 100, it has the part of the Declaration of Independence that says, we the people have the right to abolish any institution or government that treats us badly, or whatever that specific phrase is. But it's right there, right above the 100, saying that we have the right to overthrow our government. It's an amazing bill. It's beautiful, and they put it in storage. They said, we have a creasing problem. This is when the bankers got out of the crash in 2008. They said, we got a creasing problem. We're going to try to fix this. So they haven't They haven't released the 100 yet. They're waiting to the crash, and the 100 is going to be redeemable, probably backed with gold. If you look at one of the Fed Boston comics called Banking Basics, it's this comic that came out first in 1987, and then again in 2007, the same day that the Road to Ruta came out and the Wishes and Rainbows came out. It's this little booklet on certain things about banks, but they changed the booklet, and in it is people cashing in at banks gold for bills, cashing in gold at ATMs, in little coins of gold at ATMs. It's an amazing revelation, and it's got a picture of the Federal Reserve building with light shining on it, in contrast to the Gata painting that, it's coming out of the dark shadows. So it's an amazing story. The $100 bill, it fits in perfectly with the Road to Ruta theory. Unfortunately, it got delayed because of this banks saving themselves in 2008, but those bills are still in storage. They're ready to go as soon as the next crash happens, which I believe will start sometime this summer.
Oh, thanks very much for that. That's wonderful.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. You're saying big crash is coming soon. I mean, a lot of people are saying buy physical, max, and turd, so something's definitely up. Bix, obviously you're big, as you mentioned before, you read a bit of Cliff's reports, and this obviously got information on what he calls the ill winds, which is going to cause a lot of issues. And you can see what's happening in Fukushima. You can see the Missouri River bulking up, and some nuclear power plants possibly in danger. So, in terms of your preparation, you did mention you weren't a prepper before reading Cliff's reports. How do you see some of the more dire information in Cliff's reports compared to obviously a reset of the system, which assumes that everything will be a little bit better at the end of the day?
Well, Cliff tends to lean on he uses the dire language, so his reports are gonna kick out the more dire information. And he's talked about that a few times. I'm not saying that things will be nice and rosy when we return to a gold standard, and we crash the banks and return to a gold standard. There is a dark cloud on the horizon, and it is not, the bigger issues are the non-economic issues. The earth changes issues and the all those things that Cliff talks about, we see them manifesting now. The floods, you name it, it is all happening. And that's something we're going to have to live through it. The question is, do we want to live through it in the current debt system that we are slaves to, or do we want to fight our way through it with a better system, a more fair system for the people, an honest system? And I think that the original Road to Ruta guys, Greenspan and Stephen Dubois and all those guys who put together this plan kind of planned it out to run it to this time now and take back the system for America so that we have a shot at surviving the other things that we're going to have to deal with. The worst thing that we could do is have to deal with all these earth changes and changes in the ill winds and things like that when we're deep in debt. So it's kind of like, let's put a positive slant on the environment in which we'll be dealing with all these problems.
Yeah, well said, Bix. Odison, we'll finish up with the last two questions.
Hi again. My first question actually is kind of a follow-up to something you had said before. If the United States comes out of the reboot mostly intact, but the other countries suffer deeply, partially because of the breakdown of trade, partially because of bad bets on our currency, do you see this leading to a world war, the United States versus everybody else?
No, I don't think there'll be any money for war, because when the U.S. has the world's reserve currency, so a crash in the U.S. dollar where it's worthless, all the banks are interconnected. All the countries will, that are going through the austerity issues and all those problems will go away. They'll have new problems, but the debt problems, the money as debt fact of what we live today will be gone with the crash. So, the bad guys, they want a crash and they want world wars and they want to decrease the size of the population and that was their original goal. But from the U.S., I believe we'll lead by example, pulling all our troops home, starting to take care of ourselves because no one will trade with us, and in using our own natural resources instead of stealing the rest of the world's. A lot of those problems that were caused because of we ran on a debt currency will be solved, and I think the world wars will be, no one will have the money to fight them. As long as the bad guys don't take charge when the crash happens. That's kind of the, make it or break it moment is when the global system crashes, will we have the same people in charge and will we restart like an IMF type of world currency or a Marrow or anything like that? If that happens, then we're in deep trouble.
I like your reference to bringing the troops home because I actually had heard of that idea first from Ron Paul, and then later on it came up as a bot prediction. So it's kind of like a checksum, one of my checksums for me to make sure that the bots were sane and feasible. If
you look at, it's really interesting. Ron Paul has run for president 3 times. The first time was in 1987 when the market crashed. The second time was in 2007 when the market crashed, and then he just announced now. So Ron Paul is ready to take over as soon as they complete this market crash. In 88 it was Bush Sr. got the presidency because the market didn't crash. In 2008 it was Obama got the presidency because the market didn't crash. And this time it is ripe for a bigger crash. And all those things that Ron Paul has been saying since, the 70s are going to come true through the remainder of this year. And he's going to be debating people saying the same thing he said over the past 30 years. And if it is true that all this stuff happens, he'll be a shoo-in for president.
I agree. So my final question refers to what our future as a whole looks like. What economically important infrastructure is the most important to focus on repairing, updating, or hardening for the transition before the crash? For example, some possible answers could be an electric grid, nuclear plants, high-speed rails, local food production, roads and bridges, solar, wind, etc.
That for me and what I deal with, that's such a huge question and so impossible.
What's going to have the most magnifying effect that's broken right now?
I am of the opinion, from listening to Cliff High, from running the road to Ruta to its conclusion, that the economic breakdown will kind of focus the attention on local communities, your family, your friends. It'll be local communities banding together. We're not going to be able to rely on the federal government for everything anymore. As far as, taking care of yourself through the transition, it's going to be food, it's going to be water, it's going to be protection. It's going to be, you want a checklist of all the things you need, medicines and toilet paper and you name it. But, as far as the bigger picture, it will be hard to keep the country kind of running from the federal government level. I think it'll lean more towards, first of all, there won't be any money for that to happen, but I think it'll lean towards more local communities getting together. And Cliff talks about this as well. And then kind of building those local communities, kind of rebuilding to a larger statewide and then, back to a federal. But it will be, the start will be learning to take care of your own community, starting from your family unit to your neighbors to your city type of thing. That's my take.
It sounds like a social restructuring is what you're expecting to take front and center.
Oh, definitely. I mean,
to a local social structure.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it now with globalization, we get a lot of our food from offshore. We get most of our natural resources from other places, and it really will be kind of a start fresh type of scenario and build the kind of community that we want without these banksters, forcing us in various directions.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for your time tonight, Bix. May the road we choose be the right road today, is a quote from roadtorouter.com. Robert Frost wrote in one of his most famous poems, 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. The financial road that lies ahead is a bumpy one, but with people such as yourself to help guide us, perhaps some of us will find our way to the other side, whatever that may look like. On behalf of Fox and all the members of the WebBot Forum, we thank you, sir. In our tradition, may you and your family have many pies to come.
Thank you very much. I had a great time.
Thank you, Bix.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.